Hey guys, welcome to our first Old Testament from 35,000 feet geography snippet. My name is Benjamin Alley and I will be your guide through this series. This session we're going to learn some very basic geography of the Old Testament. We're also going to learn how grasping these basic geographical insights can help us to understand the meaning behind the biblical text. But before we begin, we need to answer an initial question. That question is this: why should I study the geography of the Bible? That might be a question that's going through your mind right now. Let me give you 3 reasons why it's important to study the geography of the Bible. The first reason to study the geography of the Bible is because it will help us to understand the significance of this land that has been really the playing board of history. The Bible lands are the place where so many world-changing events have occurred. These events have shaped the world's religious, cultural, social, and political views. The impact of these events continues to reach us even today. Just pick up a newspaper and you will discover the importance of the land to the people of the Middle East and how one's decision about who has a right to that land continues to shape political loyalties between countries and superpowers today. The second reason we should study the geography of the Bible is really the biblical writers assume that we as readers already know the geography to which they are referring. An illustration might help us to explain what I mean here. Imagine you've got 2 Americans and they're talking to each other about where they're going to go on vacation. American number 1 says to American number 2, I'm going to go to California on my vacation. Notice that American number 1 does not need to explain where California is located in the United States. She does not need to say, I'm going to California. You know, the state that's on the western edge of the lower 48 states. No, all she has to say is California. She assumes that the other American knows that California is on the west coast. It's common knowledge. In the same way, when the biblical writer refers to maybe like a place called Beersheba, he expects we as readers to know that it's in southern Israel. Or when he mentions Egypt or Assyria or Babylon, he expects us to know where those places are, to the regions that he's referring. Therefore, if we want to understand more of the Bible when we read it on our own, it's essential to have this basic understanding of the places and regions mentioned in the Bible. The third reason we should study the geography of the Bible is because understanding the land of the Bible makes the Bible seem more 3D and color. It makes the Bible seem more real. It takes those 2-dimensional words on a black and white page and breathes shape, color, and life into them. And when the Bible is more real to us, it becomes more relevant to us. So, studying the geography of the Bible is important because it's the land that has been the playing board of history. The writers of the Bible assume we already know the geography, and it makes the Bible seem like it's 3D and color. It makes it more real. So those are 3 good reasons. Why don't we go ahead and begin as we study some of the basic geography of the Old Testament. This is a map of the ancient Near East, the land of the Bible. The ancient Near East has been called the cradle of civilization. There's a couple reasons for that. First, because many cultural and technological advances occurred in the ancient Near East. Second reason is this area has the influence of 3 different continents. You have the influence of Africa, and the influence of Europe, and the influence of Asia. All 3 continents impact this area. It's right in the center. Many of the countries that are in the Middle East today still dominate the world news. You've got countries like Egypt and Israel and Jordan and Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. These countries still impact our world because it's really the focus of 3 different continents. Notice the green section of this map. This green area is called the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is a narrow strip of fertile land that is shaped in the form of a crescent or a semicircle in the ancient Near East. It's kind of like a crescent moon, only this crescent is facing downward. This Fertile Crescent was favorable for the establishment of early agricultural settlements. Why? Well, it's because water ran all throughout the Fertile Crescent. Notice that the Syro-Arabian desert in the middle gives the crescent its characteristic shape. And then the mountain ranges to the north and to the east mark the northern borders. However, the most important fact about this Fertile Crescent is that almost every event that occurs in the Old Testament time period occurs somewhere along this narrow strip of land or very near this narrow strip of land. Let's look next at some important bodies of water in the ancient Near East. We begin in the east with two important rivers, the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Both of these rivers flow out of the mountains and down into the Persian Gulf. Now sometimes it's hard to remember which of these rivers is which. Is the Tigris north of the Euphrates, or is the Euphrates north of the Tigris? The way that I remember is I think of a tiger jumping over a body of water. So the Tiger jumps over the Euphrates. The Tigris is north of the Euphrates. Next we have several bodies of water that impact Israel specifically. You have the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and then the Dead Sea, and then of course the Mediterranean Sea. The final river in the region is the Nile River, very important river to Egypt. The Nile River provided nourishment for the land of Egypt as well as transportation and communication between cities. Now let's look at some important regions in the ancient Near East. First of all, in the east, or in the west, you have Egypt. Egypt was a highly influential country through many parts of the Old Testament. Then you have a small little area called Moab. Moab is the place where the people went after their wilderness wanderings and before they conquered the Promised Land under Joshua. It's the site of the biblical book of Deuteronomy. Next we have Israel. Israel is important for our purposes specifically because it's the land of the Jews in the Old Testament. North of Israel we have Syria. Sometimes it's called Aram in the Old Testament. And then at the top of the Fertile Crescent we have Assyria. Notice that there's a difference here. There's Assyria and then there's Syria. Assyria was at the top of the Fertile Crescent and had a huge influence on the known world during around 800 to 700 BC. Then in the east, we have Babylon. The Babylonians were the ones who took the Israelites into slavery towards the end of the Old Testament. And then finally we have the Persians. The Persians were the ones who conquered the Babylonians at the end of the Old Testament, and the Persians allowed the Jews to return to their homeland in Israel after being taken to Babylon as slaves. At this point, it's important for us to point out something important about this map in particular. I'm going to do so with an illustration. On your screen, you have two maps of what is today called the United States. On the right-hand side is a modern map of the United States. Notice that in the central United States, that area was once called Missouri and Kansas. The map on the left is the same territory, but during the 1700s. It was during the colonial period. Notice that the central part of this territory, the same area that's today called Missouri and Kansas, was at that time called New France. It had a different name because a different authority controlled the land. Now I want you to imagine that we combine the two maps at the top into one map. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, that's what I've tried to do. I tried to combine those two maps so that you can see the entities that control the same land at different moments in history. However, it's all on the same map. Now the map that I've given you of the important regions of the Old Testament is very similar to this map because it shows the different entities that control the land at different points of time. So there's a couple of points that need to be emphasized as a result. First, in the same way that the central United States changed names from New France to Missouri and Kansas, the regions of the Old Testament sometimes change names as we pass through time. I've given you the region names that those regions are most often referred to in the Old Testament. But you should realize that these names sometimes change. Second, the area of New France used to be quite large, and then it got cut up into all of these little states. So the area changed. It contracts and expands according to where we are in history. And then the same thing happens in these regions. Sometimes this is Babylon, the circled area, but sometimes Babylon extends all the way into the rest of the Fertile Crescent. And the same could be said of Assyria. So it's just important to realize that these lands contract and they expand. So as we study the Old Testament, we need to keep these 2 points in mind. Sometimes the names of places change, and sometimes the size of territory controlled changes as we pass through time.